Okay, let's just jump right in. I want you to imagine a war, but not a war between nations or even ideologies. I'm talking about a formal declaration of war by a national military, in this case, the Royal Australian Artillery, against a population of giant flightless birds.
It sounds completely absurd, doesn't it? And, in many ways, it's become this global punchline, the Great Emu War of 1932.
Mm.
But our mission in this deep dive is to get past that absurdity. We've got a whole stack of sources here, historical articles, economic reports, military files, and they paint a surprisingly complex picture.
Exactly, because what our sources reveal is that this wasn't just some bizarre pest control mission gone wrong. This was a collision of so many things: a global economic collapse, a failed government policy after World War I, and just inescapable ecological pressure. All of it coming to a head in the wheat belt of Western Australia.
We're going to dig into why the military was even sent in and, well, how they managed to lose so spectacularly.
And it's a very specific time and place we're looking at. We're talking about the Campion district in Western Australia, mostly over a single month, November to early December 1932.
Right. And the adversary, the official estimate was an army of around 20,000 emus.
20,000. And the military response, led by a Major GPW Meredith, it wasn't just a few guys with rifles. They brought heavy weaponry, Lewis machine guns, which, as we're about to find out, they were completely wrong for the job.
Which brings us to the core question, I think, for you, the listener. Why were these farmers, many of them hardened war veterans, in such a desperate state that they demanded the army come and open fire on the local wildlife?
To really get that, you have to look back. The roots of this whole conflict, they don't start in 1932. They go back to the end of the First World War.
Exactly. This entire mess was a direct symptom of a huge, well-intentioned, but ultimately failed government program called the Soldier Settlement Scheme.
Right. And this was this massive initiative. It was designed to solve two huge national problems at once. First, you reward the thousands of returning soldiers, the veterans from Gallipoli, from the Western Front, give them a dignified life.
And second, you dramatically boost Australia's agricultural output. You turn these soldiers into farmers, make them self-sufficient, and grow the nation's wheat production. A win-win on paper.
A huge win-win. And the scale of it, especially in Western Australia, was just enormous. We're talking about something like 5,000 veterans in WA alone who were granted plots of land.
The promise was so appealing. After the horrors of the trenches, you get to return to this peaceful agrarian life and the government has your back, or so they thought.
But the reality of those land grants, it was a different story entirely. Our sources are very, very clear on this. Most of the land they were given was what experts called marginal land.
Especially in that semi-arid interior, the wheat belt, places like Chandler and Wollongong. This wasn't the lush, fertile coast.
And what does marginal actually mean in this context?
It means poor soil. It means low and wildly unpredictable rainfall. It means it's incredibly susceptible to drought. Fundamentally, these plots of land were just. They were ill-suited for the kind of intensive farming that the politicians back in Canberra had in mind.
So they were set up to fail from day one, saddled with debt to buy equipment, clear land that just couldn't produce what they needed it to.
Absolutely. And if the poor land quality was strike one,
Then the global economy was strike two. And three, the Great Depression, starting in 1929, just brutally exposed how vulnerable this whole scheme was.
the bottom just fell out of the market. Wheat prices completely collapsed. You had this massive global oversupply with countries like the US, Canada, Argentina all flooding the market. So Australian farmers were producing wheat, but the price they were getting, it didn't even cover the cost of the seed they planted.
Let's just put that into perspective for you. Nationally, unemployment in Australia peaked at a staggering 32% in 1932. 32%. So if you're a veteran on one of these failing farms, you can't just pack up and go find a job in the city.
There were no jobs.
None. So you're trapped. You're stuck on this failing piece of land, just watching everything crumble.
And this brings us to a really crucial detail that I think speaks to the humiliation these men felt. Their reliance on it was called the SUSO.
The SUSO, that sounds like a strange word, but it was basically state-sponsored relief, a welfare payment, a dole.
Right. And you have to remember, these were men who had been sold a dream. They were war heroes who were promised dignity, self-sufficiency. And now, here they are, relying on government handouts just to feed their families on the very land the government gave them.
That sense of betrayal must have been profound. The government brings you home, gives you bad land, the economy collapses, and now you're on the dole. It created this tinderbox of frustration out in the wheat belt.
Exactly. So you have this perfect storm of human desperation, poverty, debt, humiliation. And into that storm walks an ecological disaster
In the form of the emu.
in the form of 20,000 emus. See, there was a prolonged drought in the arid central parts of Australia, and that forced this enormous emu population to migrate. They were following ancient instincts, just moving towards the coast, looking for food and water.
And what did they find?
They found paradise, these farms that the veterans had painstakingly carved out of the bush, with their freshly cleared fields, their ripe grain crops, their man-made watering holes for livestock. One source calls it an irresistible biological magnet,
They weren't seeing property lines. They were seeing a buffet.
a life-saving buffet. And the destruction they caused was catastrophic for the farmers. It wasn't just that they were eating the wheat, they were trampling the fields, compacting the soil, ruining everything.
But the crucial part, the detail that really pushed things over the edge, was about the fences, wasn't it?
Yes, the rabbit-proof fences. This was this huge infrastructure project that had been going on since the early 1900s to protect farmland from pests. The emus, in their thousands, were so big and powerful, they broke right through them. They push against the wire until it snapped, leaving these huge, ragged gaps.
And that's absolutely vital because once those fences were breached,
The secondary pests came pouring in, rabbits most of all. So the emus weren't just the problem anymore, they were the battering ram that let every other problem in. They turned a failing farm into a complete wasteland.
so the desperation just boils over. And our sources say the farmers, because so many of them were WWI vets, they didn't go through the usual channels.
No. They bypassed the Department of Agriculture entirely. They knew who to talk to. They sent a deputation directly to the Minister of Defense, Sir George Pierce.
And they knew exactly what to ask for.
They knew exactly what they wanted. Firepower. They weren't asking for traps or poison. They'd seen what machine guns could do in the trenches, and they believed that was the only thing that could stop an enemy 20,000 strong.
And unbelievably, Sir George Pierce agreed. Almost immediately. But let's pause on that. Because his decision, it wasn't just about helping farmers, it was a calculated political move.
Oh, absolutely. He had two very clear interlocking motivations. First, the political one. You have to remember, Western Australia in 1932 was going through immense hardship, and this was fueling a very real secessionist movement. The idea of WA just leaving the Australian Federation was gaining serious traction.
So Pierce needed to look like the federal government in Canberra actually cared about what was happening out west. Deploying the army, even on a mission this bizarre, was a very visible, very tangible show of support. It was PR.
It was absolutely PR. But he also had a pragmatic military reason. He saw it as a kind of live fire training exercise. It was a great opportunity for his troops to get target practice against fast-moving, unpredictable targets in rugged country. Very different from drills on a firing range.
Okay, but I have to jump in on the money side of things here because this is just incredible. The arrangement, the conditions of engagement, they were almost insulting. The military supplied the men and the Lewis guns. The WA government paid for their transport.
But this is the kicker. The farmers themselves had to pay for everything else. Food, lodging, and the ammunition. All 10,000 rounds of it.
These men, many of whom were on the Suso, were being asked to pay for the bullets the army was going to use. It just shows you how desperate they were and how much the government expected this to be a quick, clean operation.
Totally. They thought it would be a cakewalk. The Expeditionary Force itself was tiny. You have Major G.P.W. Meredith in command. And under him, just two other men, Sergeant S. McMurray and Gunner J. O'Halloran.
3 men against 20,000 emus.
With 2 Lewis light machine guns and that stockpile of 10,000 rounds. And to make sure everyone saw how easy it was all going to be, they brought a camera crew along. A cinematographer from Fox Movie Tone News was there to document the swift victory.
Right, for the newsreels.
Yeah.
And there's this one anecdote that just perfectly captures the overconfidence. Apparently, there was a secondary objective. The troops were ordered to collect 100 emu skins.
And why?
So the feathers could be used to make the ceremonial hats for the Australian light horsemen.
You're kidding me. They weren't just planning to win the war. They were planning to accessorize with the enemy.
It's unbelievable. But what they were all profoundly underestimating was the adversary itself. An emu is not a simple target.
Not at all. It's the second largest bird in the world. They can stand up to 6 feet tall. That's 1.9 meters. Their head is well above a machine gunner lying on the ground.
And they are fast.
Yeah.
So fast. They can run flat out at around 50 kilometers an hour. That's over 30 miles per hour.
And as Major Meredith would soon find out, they're also incredibly tough. Their thick feathers, their dense muscle, they could take a bullet or several and just keep running. They were, in a very real sense, armored.
So the operation gets underway, and it's a mess right from the start. It was supposed to happen in October, but some unexpected rain scattered the birds, which already threw off their main strategy.
Their plan was to find these huge, massed flocks at watering holes and just mow them down. But when they finally mobilized on November 2nd near Campion, the birds were all spread out.
And that first engagement was a total failure. They spot a group of about 50 emus, but they're too far away. So the local farmers try to help. They try to herd the birds towards the guns like sheep.
And of course, that doesn't work. The emus aren't sheep. They immediately split into small, fast-moving groups and scattered in every direction. It was impossible to get a clear shot.
And right there, you see the fundamental flaw in their thinking. These soldiers were trained for trench warfare, firing at a fixed enemy line. The concept of suppressive fire is meaningless when your enemy just runs away at 50 kilometers an hour.
Exactly. So their next big attempt came on November 4th. This was the famous dam ambush. Scouts had spotted a huge flock, over 1,000 emus, heading for a local dam. This was their chance.
So the gunners dig in. They wait for the birds to get nice and close to maximize the damage.
And then the gun jams.
Of course it does.
The Lewis gun was a reliable weapon, but it was still a complex piece of WWI machinery. The gunner opens fire, takes out maybe a dozen birds, and then click. Silence. And while he's frantically trying to clear the stoppage, the other 990 birds scatter into the bush and disappear.
1,000-bird target, and they get 12. That's not a good ratio.
It's a disaster. And it forced Major Meredith to completely change his strategy. He realized static ambushes were useless, so he decides to go mobile.
This is where the trucks come in.
This is where the trucks come in.
Yeah.
He mounts one of the Lewis guns onto the back of a truck. The idea was to create a mobile firing platform that could actually chase the emus down.
But the technology was all wrong. A Lewis gun is heavy. It needs a stable platform. And the Australian wheat belt is not a smooth road.
Not even close. It's rough, uneven country, full of rocks, stumps, bumps. The ride was so violent that the gunner couldn't aim at all. It was impossible to hit anything, let alone a bird running erratically at full speed. And the trucks, they couldn't even keep up with the emus.
And wasn't there a report of one of the trucks just crashing?
There was. One truck, in hot pursuit of a flock, swerved so erratically it drove straight into a fence. I mean, can you just imagine the Fox movie tone newsreel footage?
The Great Australian Army chasing a giant bird and losing a fight with a fence. It really sums up the whole first phase of the operation.
And as this went on, the soldiers started to develop this kind of grudging respect for their enemy. The official army observers started writing in their reports that the emus seemed to be displaying, well, tactical awareness.
They weren't just running blindly.
No. They noted that, quote, each pack seems to have its own leader now, a big black-plumed bird. This leader would stand 6 feet tall, acting as a lookout, a sentinel, and it would warn the others as soon as the soldiers got close.
The ornithologist Dominic Cervanti famously commented on this later, didn't he?
He did. He said, and I love this quote, that the Emu Command had evidently ordered guerrilla tactics. The military had come expecting a conventional battle against a massive army, and instead they found themselves fighting an insurgency. The emus had split into countless small, mobile cells that were impossible to pin down.
The numbers from that first phase, just 6 days, are just damning. By November 8th, they'd fired about 2,500 rounds of ammunition.
Ammunition the farmers had paid for.
Right. And the confirmed kill count. The estimates vary, but somewhere between 50 and maybe 500 at the most optimistic.
It was a humiliating failure. And the press had a field day. The newspapers were gleefully reporting that only a few emus had died. The whole thing was becoming a national joke. So facing ridicule in the media and sharp questions in Parliament, Defense Minister Pierce had no choice.
He pulled the plug. On November 8th, the troops were withdrawn. The war was over. Or so it seemed.
Right. The withdrawal didn't actually solve the problem, of course. It just moved the crisis from the wheat belt to the capital to Canberra. The political fallout was immediate and intense.
This is where Defense Minister Pierce gets his famous nickname.
It is. Senator James Dunn, who was a fierce critic of the government, stood up in Parliament and mockingly called him the Minister of the Emu War.
And it stuck.
It stuck immediately. And the Prime Minister, Joseph Lyons, he was getting hammered too. He was asked in Parliament completely seriously whether a medal would be struck for the campaign, for the soldiers, Or maybe for the emus.
The entire country was laughing at them. And yet, back in Western Australia, the emus were still there. The problem hadn't gone away. So the farmers, supported by the WA Premier James Mitchell, they started lobbying again. Send the army back.
And Pierce was in a tough spot. He needed political cover to redeploy troops after such a public failure. So he goes to the Senate and he gives this big speech defending the original decision. He tries to shift the focus away from the dead birds and onto the economic stakes, the threat to agriculture, the rabbits.
And he gets his justification from a very convenient report, as I understand it.
A very convenient report from the base commander. Suddenly, the numbers for Phase 1 looked a lot better. This new report claimed they had actually killed 300 emus, not 50. It was almost certainly an inflated number, but it was enough. It gave Pierce the excuse he needed.
So by November 12th, the mission is back on, and Major Meredith is sent back into the field.
He had to be. They didn't really have anyone else with experience operating a Lewis gun. So Phase 2 begins on November 13th, and it runs until December 10th.
And this second attempt, it was different. It was less about dramatic battles and more about slow, grinding attrition.
Exactly. They gave up on the trucks and the big ambushes. They just started doing patrols, localized hunting, and they started getting more consistent results. The kill rate went up to about 100 emus a week by early December.
Then we get to Meredith's final report on December 10th. And the numbers in this, they seem a little too neat.
They do. He claims 986 confirmed kills, and he claims they used 9,860 rounds of ammunition.
Wait, so that's an exact ratio of 10 rounds per kill.
10 rounds on the dot.
That sounds convenient, like a number that's been massaged for the official record to make it look efficient.
Historians largely agree. That 10.1 ratio is almost certainly a post hoc rationalization. But it gets worse. On top of the 986 confirmed kills, Meredith adds a highly speculative number. He claims that an additional 2,500 emus were wounded and died later.
Which is a number that's completely impossible to verify.
Utterly impossible. It's widely seen as an inflated figure designed to save face and make the whole operation look like a success.
But the most famous thing to come out of this entire war is probably Major Meredith's own final assessment of his enemy. He seems to have come away with a genuine respect for the emus.
A profound respect. He gives that famous quote where he compares their resilience to military hardware. He says they can face machine guns with the invulnerability of tanks. I mean, think about that. This is a WWI veteran. He knows what tanks are. And he's comparing a bird to the most fearsome weapon of his time.
And he didn't stop there, did he? He compared them to Zulus.
He did. He said they were like Zulus whom even dum-dum bullets could not stop. And he concluded that if you had a military division of soldiers who could absorb bullets the way an emu could, they could face any army in the world.
It's this strange, almost poetic tribute from a soldier to a bird.
It is, and it's also the perfect military excuse, isn't it? It reframes the narrative. We didn't lose because our strategy was flawed. We lost because the enemy was superhuman. It shifts the blame from the army to the bird.
So the military adventure is finally over, the humiliation is complete, and the government, it seems, finally learned a lesson.
A critical one. Don't use a machine gun when what you really need is a good fence. Because despite farmers asking again and again in the following years, 1934, 1943, even 1948, the government refused. They never deployed the military for pest control again. The 32 debacle settled that debate for good.
So what was the real solution? If the army couldn't do it, who could?
The locals. The government finally embraced a much simpler, decentralized approach, the bounty system.
Which had actually been around for a while, hadn't it?
It had since 1923, but now it was properly funded and became the primary strategy. And the difference in results is just staggering.
Let's compare the numbers. The Great Military Expedition, with all its planning and hardware, managed fewer than 1,000 confirmed kills in about a month.
Right. Now look at the bounty system. In a single 6-month period in 1934, local farmers and hunters, being paid a small fee for each kill, claimed bounties on 57,034 emus.
57,000. It's not even comparable.
It's exponential success.
Yeah.
Because you're empowering people with local knowledge, people who understand the terrain and the animal's behavior. You give them a financial incentive, and they solve the problem far more efficiently than any top-down military operation could.
But even that wasn't the permanent fix. The ultimate solution was even simpler. It was infrastructure.
Exclusion fencing. The farmers eventually realized that instead of trying to wage a war of annihilation, it was easier just to build a better wall.
So they started putting up these high tensile barrier fences, 5 feet tall, sometimes with barbed wire, specifically designed to keep out not just emus, but rabbits and dingoes too.
It was a total shift in philosophy, from active warfare to passive defense, from eradication to management. And in the long run, that proved to be the only thing that truly worked.
But the problem didn't just vanish overnight. The threat lingered for a long, long time.
It did. We see this fascinating little echo of the Emu War almost 2 decades later, in 1950. An MP named Hugh Leslie stands up in Parliament. He's not asking for troops this time. He's asking for ammunition.
500,000 rounds, wasn't it?
500,000 rounds of .303 ammunition from army stores to be released to the farmers.
So the idea that this was a problem best solved with firepower, it never completely went away.
No, but the responsibility had shifted from the army to the individual, and that was the key.
So what is the final verdict on this whole affair? How do we remember the Great Emu War today?
Well, historically, the verdict is unchanged. It was an absolute failure and a source of international ridicule for Australia. Ornithologists who wrote about it at the time, like Dominic Cervanty and Hubert Whittell, they just dryly described the whole war as an attempt at the mass destruction of the birds.
But there's this incredible paradox at the heart of its legacy, isn't there? The emu, the bird that defeated the Australian army in a humiliating campaign.
Is now on the Australian national coat of arms, standing proudly next to the kangaroo.
It's a fundamental symbol of the nation.
Yeah.
The irony is just beautiful.
It really is. It sort of speaks to a national character, an ability to laugh at ourselves, to laugh at our own bureaucracy, and to celebrate nature's ability to just win.
And ecologically, the war was a non-event. The emu population was barely dented. The IUCN lists them today as a species of least concern. They're doing just fine.
The only real casualty was the defense minister's dignity. But the story itself, it's become this beloved national joke, this perfect, self-deprecating tale of when humanity, with all its technology, went up against nature and lost. And it just keeps getting retold. There are movies now, musicals in the works. It has a life of its own.
It's such a powerful story because it teaches a very clear lesson. It shows the absolute limits of applying a solution from one context industrial warfare to a completely different one, an ecological problem.
And the success of the other methods, the local bounties, the fences, it just highlights that you have to tailor your solution to the actual problem. You can't just use whatever hammer you happen to have lying around.
And if we step back, it's really a cautionary tale about that post-war mindset. These soldiers were trained for the static, predictable horror of the trenches on the Western Front. When they were faced with the dynamic chaos of the Australian bush and an enemy running on pure instinct, all of their training, all of their technology, it just fell apart.
The war was really just a symptom. The real disease was the political neglect and the economic desperation that put those farmers in that impossible position in the first place. The emus were just being emus. They were doing what they'd always done. The real tragedy wasn't the military losing. It was that the veterans had been so badly let down that they were trapped between bankruptcy and 20,000 hungry birds.
So we've gone deep into the Great Emu War of 1932. We started with those desperate post-WWI farmers, trapped on marginal land by the Great Depression.
We followed the unstoppable force of 20,000 migrating emus, drawn to the wheat fields as their only source of survival.
We analyzed the spectacular, almost comical failure of the military intervention, how Lewis machine guns were useless against the speed, the resilience, and the quote-unquote guerrilla tactics of the birds.
And we saw how the real solution wasn't military might at all. It was localized knowledge, financial incentives, and ultimately just better fences.
The soldiers, veterans of the Great War, were trained to fight a human enemy in a trench. But the emus, driven by instinct and drought, won because they were perfectly adapted to their environment in a way the soldiers and their technology simply were not.
Which brings us to a final thought for you to take away. How often, even today, do we make that same mistake? How often do we see a complex environmental or ecological problem and treat it like a nail that just needs a bigger hammer?
When the real solution might be something quieter. Local knowledge, better infrastructure, or maybe just a deeper understanding of the natural system we're trying to control. The Great Emu War is a humbling, hilarious reminder that sometimes nature's quiet, unintentional dominance can easily overwhelm our most ambitious plans. It makes you wonder, what other moments in history show nature just quietly defeating human hubris? It's a useful lens, I think, for looking at a lot of the problems we still face today.